What do you mean, no?
You have a bell mic.
Yeah?
Okay, I want to make sure.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the coffee.
Oh, no, we'll get your coffee. That's easy.
Did you get it? I just talked,
It's
yeah.
on order.
So there was a debate whether I needed to be mic'd up for tonight because, as some of you have heard before, I've got a pretty loud, booming voice. However, I've been traveling a ridiculous amount, and I'm a little tired, and I'm not sure what time zone I'm in. I'm reasonably sure I'm in the US somewhere. So we decided that the mic would be prudent. In April of this year, I was on Bainbridge Island drinking with Harry, which is something that Harry and I do when we are together. And I said, hey, Harry, I've been talking about the post-SBS era for the last 5 years. Why don't we do a presentation at SMB Nation and call it My Vision of SMBIT in a post-SBS era? And he said, hey, that would be a great idea. I didn't know that the product was actually being discontinued. I mean, I've been predicting it for 5 years. And how many of you are MVPs? So those of you who are MVPs who have never heard me say, SBSers, start learning the underlying technologies of SBS because SBS will go away. Any of you heard me say that before? No. 100 times? So I've been talking about this for a while. So we're talking about my vision of SMBIT where SBS is in the past, which when I proposed this session was theoretical. And security, stability, availability, manageability, and portability are more vital than ever. Now, some of you may know a friend of mine named Dana Epp. And Dana, when he comes to these events, whether it's here or in Toronto or in New Orleans, will take someone's iPod, iPad, fruit basket, and start reading their email without actually logging into it. Security is more vital than ever. Availability. I have discovered, I've been saying for years that all of my customers all want 5 nines uptime. The problem is they want to pay for 9 fives uptime. Does this sound familiar to you? But availability is more important than ever. Manageability is more important, and portability is more important than they've ever been before. Why? Well, manageability is more important because the wizard's gone. Sorry, guys, I know for those of us who've been living in SBS for the last decade or more, how many of you have taken any of the SBS exams over the last 8 years? Now, if you're not sure, the answer was always, use the wizard, stupid. Those wizards are gone. Oh my God, you're going to have to learn the technology. So let's talk about the post-SBS era. Is it really true? I've been predicting it for a long time, but it was finally announced. It was announced in May or June of this year, and yes, it is real. It is not going to be rescinded. They're not saying that SBS is being discontinued. It's being evolved. And Windows Server Essentials is going to take over with hooks into the cloud and all of those things. So is it real? Kinda. It's evolved into something else, but it's certainly something that we've got to be aware of. So what should I do? I've been relying on SBS for the last 10 years. And I made a lot of friends among the SBS MVPs when I started saying, guys, start getting certified in other technologies. SBS is just the tip of the iceberg. And by the way, you have Active Directory here. You have Exchange Server, you have SharePoint. Well, okay. The good news is this isn't oh my God, it's got to happen today. SBS 2011 is available and will continue to be available for the foreseeable future and will be supported for the foreseeable future. So this isn't something that you've got to jump off a cliff and push your customers off a cliff. You have time to plan out where you're going from here. Now I will bet you, and I'm not going to ask the question, if I were to ask this room, how many of you have made a good living on SBS, I would see every hand shoot up. And if I then ask, okay, now that you know that SBS is going to go away, how are you going to make your livings? How many of you know the answer to that question today? Well, not nearly as many of you as I'd like to see. So we have to plan our next strategy. Are we going to go to Azure? Are we going to go to Office 365 and Windows Intune? Are we going to go, oh my God, Enterprise and System Center? But what we do know is that we have to start taking the time to educate ourselves and start learning a new technology. When we went from SBS 2003 to SBS 2008, you had to spend an afternoon installing it, and okay, what was used to be the CEI CW is now called something else CW, and it's another wizard, and it does the same thing, and okay, I'm happy. Well, we're going to have to learn new technologies and new ways of doing business. So, what are my options? We have several options we can consider. The first one, we can continue doing what we've been doing for all these years and supporting our existing SBS boxes and clients. Hope they stay up and hope that our customers never realize that their server is 14 years old, and make sure that until we retire, they're a good source of income, and after that, it's someone else's problem. We can follow our lifelong dreams and open a hot dog stand, or, I don't know, become professional bungee jumpers, or whatever it happens to be. Or we can evolve. We can realize that the industry is no longer going to be use the wizard stupid. It's going to be something else. It's not always going to be on premises either. It's going to be something else. It's also, by the way, not always going to be, hey, you want me to do an hour's work, it's $125 an hour. If you want me to do 2 hours work, it's $250 an hour. And so on and so on and so forth. We've already started to migrate to this new concept of managed service provider, and as many of you are saying, why should we be pushed off of SBS? I remember 6 years ago when people started talking about managed service models, so many people were saying, why would I want to do that? How can I make money off of that? I don't know how I'm going to live if that's the way the industry is going. I had a very similar slide with the hot dog stand back then. So, our best course of action is to start learning where we can go. First of all, you don't need to build a whole new infrastructure. I laugh, but for years I've been saying to people, SBSers, I've been saying I'm not an SBSer, I'm an IT professional. And a lot of the SBSers took offense to that. But really, how many of you have been using SBS for all of these years and don't know what ADUC stands for? Active Directory Users and Computers. It's the MMC console that the entire world outside of SBS uses to manage our environments. But it's there. You can go into your SBS and create a user or a computer using the ADUC. You can modify it and you can manage it. It's all there. So we have the technology, the underlying technology, to start getting our certifications, to start getting the basis for where we're going. It's there for us. Peek behind the wizards to see what's behind the curtain. Who's the Wizard of Oz behind that curtain? Try your hand at Active Directory, and by the way, let's have fun. Let's actually get beyond just using the MMC consoles, which by the way is only one step removed from using the wizards, and see what you can do in PowerShell and scripting. So that if you have to do the same thing across 100 clients, I remember managing 25 SBS clients in Montreal, and whenever I had to do something that took 2 hours, I went and did it on client 1, then I went to do it on client 2, then I went to do it on client 3, and if I had 25 clients and it took 2 hours, I knew 25 times $250 is what I was going to earn off of it. Well, using the managed service model, where I can charge for performance and not for billable time, I can now do the same thing but do it smarter. First of all, I can do it all remotely. Second of all, if it's 2 hours of pressing buttons, I can create the PowerShell script that presses those buttons for me, and rather than needing 2 hours at every one of my clients to do it, I need 2 minutes at every one of my clients because it's the same script across the board. I just create the script once and run it 25 or 100 times. That means what used to take me 50 hours now takes me under 1. Now, I make this sound so easy. I make this sound like one morning I woke up and said, you know what? I don't need the wizards anymore. I'm going to shed myself of the wizards and I'm going to start scripting in PowerShell. It was a long transition and fiscally not the most comfortable one. Well, there are resources available. Back when I decided to get certified in Windows Server 2000, I went to a class and I started learning, and it cost me thousands and thousands of dollars. Microsoft still makes that option available, but we also have books, and there are third-party books available, and I've seen some of my colleagues in the room who write books are here. And there's also free online resources for Microsoft Learning. The Microsoft Virtual Academy, which, by the way, MicrosoftVirtualAcademy.com, I really think that they could have found a shorter URL, but there it is, MicrosoftVirtualAcademy.com. And it's a really cool site where you can get all of the education about everything we're talking about: Windows Server, System Center, virtualization, PowerShell, Exchange, SQL, I'm sure BizTalk, I haven't looked for it. You can get the education on all of that, run through it all for free, and it's cool. It actually ranks you. It says, okay, you've run through 37 modules. Here's where you rank globally and in your country, and it will tell you who the top 3 people are in your country. So if you really want to impress everybody, go through all of them and become the top MVA guy in the United States, and wow, very impressive. But let's not talk about 37. Let's start with one exam. You all know Windows Server, and by the way, most of you probably know Windows Client too. Well, maybe you know enough to pass an exam and maybe you don't, but Microsoft.com/MCP, the Microsoft Learning Portal, will tell you what is required, what type of information is required to pass each exam. And if you go there and say, okay, here I want to take exam 70-659 on Windows Server Virtualization on Hyper-V, and okay, I know everything about Hyper-V, and I know everything about installing it. I know, oh, wait, it wants PowerShell commands, and it's telling you, okay, you need to know the PowerShell commands. That's something I don't know. Go back to the MVA and learn it. Go back to your book, go back to my blog, which, by the way, the best site on the internet for all of this information, garvis.ca. Start with one exam on something that you're relatively familiar with. Some of you may start with the exam for Windows Small Business Server. And by the way, that's a pretty good start too, because I'm told that the 2011 exam isn't all about the wizards. So I'm going to talk about several different technologies that we're going to use to manage our post-SBS environment. Now, I should mention that I started by saying that I proposed this topic 7 months ago. I was on a train from Montreal to Toronto yesterday at about 6 o'clock at night, and after my 3rd drink, I realized I hadn't put it together. So if the slide deck isn't as comprehensive as I would like for it to be, you'll excuse me, but I'll hopefully get through the information anyways. For those of you who've seen me present, I don't like to teach by the RTFS method. You have several options. On-premise is great. You know what? You want to install Windows Server? I'm a Hyper-V guy. I'm a virtualization guy. I want you to install Windows Server on Hyper-V and have a couple of virtual machines that's running your Active Directory and your file server and whatever other servers you need in your organization. But Exchange is no longer in Windows Server Essentials. And how many of you, if you take the SBS wizards out of it, think you could really install an Exchange server properly? Wow. Excellent. How many of you would rather someone else do it for you? Yeah. So my favorite method is Office 365. You know, I was talking to David Fabridis earlier today. We're relatively sure that I have the largest server infrastructure in the world that supports 3 people. But I don't have the time. I could install an Exchange server, and you know what? I could run it and manage it pretty well, but I don't have the time to manage it and maintain it. So rather than doing that, I went to Office 365. Now, Office 365 is a great example because it takes my application infrastructure for my Exchange server, for my SharePoint server, and puts it in the cloud. which means that it's always properly patched, managed, and maintained. And by the way, redundant to a level that would boggle most of our minds. And I don't have to worry about it. Nobody ever gets a bounced back message, sorry, Mitch at SWMI is not available because his mail server's down. So Office 365 is for the applications, but I need to manage my workstations as well, my client PCs, and through Windows Intune. Windows Intune allows me to monitor the PCs in my organization without having to have a centralized installed on-premise solution. So we call it System Center Configuration Manager in the cloud. It's not quite there, but it's close enough for most small business needs that I use it for several people. Now, I do have a full System Center environment, but my mother's computer is not on my domain. My mother-in-law is not on my domain. And I've got a whole bunch of people. How many of you support the IT for every friend and family member that you know, and you do it for free or for beer? Uh-huh. And how often do you get a call, something's not right, and you go, and while you're there, you apply some patches, and after you realize that it's 2.5 hours they've been sitting at their computer, and okay, you're done. Well, Intune takes care of the patch management. It takes care of your antivirus. It takes care of your security. And by the way, if they're having a problem, they click a button, and it sends you, wherever you are in the world, a notification that says, hey, Betty, your mother-in-law, is having a problem with her laptop. She's requested remote assistance. Can you accept the invitation? And the remote assistance connection is established. Now, between you, me, and the doorpost, my mother-in-law wouldn't know how to establish a remote assistance request if it bit her on the nose. But the button literally says, ask Mitch for help. And poof, I log on to her computer. And I fix it for her. And she loves it. But you know, if I can do my applications off-prem, and I can do my computer management off-prem, what do I need an on-premise server for? And with that, I say, you know what? If I can do everything that I was doing before without an on-premise server, then I no longer have to worry about hardware. I can free myself of hardware. Enter Windows Azure. By the way, that's how it's properly pronounced, and we get lectured on that. So if you call it Azure, we get in trouble. It's Azure. We have some really stupid rules. Anyways, Windows Azure started off as a dev platform, which was really cool. But now it has the ability to host my Hyper-V machines in a Microsoft cloud. So if I do need the equivalent of SBS without having any on-premise hardware, let's try this. I'm going to use Office 365 to manage my mail server and my SharePoint server. That's off. What else is on it? SkyDrive is going to take care of my file server. And I'm going to have two different levels, by the way. I'm going to have document sharing within SharePoint, but just for my individual file shares, I'm going to use either SkyDrive or wait for it. SkyDrive Pro is going to allow us to do this. Was I allowed to talk about that yet? Okay, phew. SkyDrive Pro is going to allow me to have my company's own private file share in the cloud, in a Windows Azure machine. But I need Active Directory. Well, I can put that in an Azure machine too. So my HP servers, and I love my HP servers. I mean, the Gen 8 ProLiants are absolutely gorgeous. But if I don't have the wherewithal, or if I'm living in an area where connectivity is questionable, or if I can't continue to pay these ridiculous electricity bills every month, then I can put it all up into the cloud. And all I have to worry about is an internet connection. And by the way, with the number of workers who are now working off-site, remotely, our previous speaker and I were talking before, as I pulled his fruit sticker off of his laptop, he yelled at me and said, "That's the only way I can work at Starbucks." How many of you work at cafes? How many of you work in hotel rooms? How many of you love your VPN connectivity? Okay. Now, I know one person in the room is going to raise their hand. How many of you have direct access infrastructures? Okay, 3 other people raised their hand aside from Ollie. Well, if you don't have all of that, then why don't you put everything in the cloud where people can connect without having to create their VPN connections? They can work remotely from wherever, because if they're not coming into the office, what difference does it make if you have an on-premise server? By the way, your Windows Azure Hyper-V machines can be managed from Server Manager. Now, when I say they can be managed from Server Manager, I don't mean you can remote desktop into them and then use the Server Manager. I'm saying you can download the remote server administration tools for Windows 8 onto your client, open the Server Manager, connect to your remote server in the Azure cloud, and manage it from your desktop. I'm not saying you can see what's there. I'm saying you can add, remove roles, you can start services, stop services, you can do everything that you would do locally, remotely. You can do that with PowerShell too. Server Manager is really, really cool for that. It's no longer this MMC console that used to be, where you could manage 5 different servers separately, but they happen to be in the same window. It's now an entire infrastructure. And if you have a hybrid environment of, let's say you've got a couple of servers here and a couple of servers in the cloud, when you open Server Manager, it has this dashboard that previously you had to go to third parties to do, and it will show you the health of every service within your organization on the front screen. And it's very, very simple, I mean, mind-numbingly. Green is good, and red is bad, as an apology to my friends from D&H. Oh, my battery's running low here. I forgot to plug my computer in. Just as an aside, it would be very embarrassing if my computer went off while I was up here trying to talk. Kind of look silly. So I have to have the ability to manage from anywhere, and Server Manager allows me to do that. And I have the dashboard which tells me what's healthy and what's not. Now, how many of you know what Server Core is? How many of you have used Server Core? Not nearly enough of you. Now, when I say not nearly enough, I apologize. You have to remember I come from an enterprise world where most of us are using 50 to 150 servers or more. I gotta find, it's over here, thanks. So, we're wasting all of these resources by using the GUI. I love the GUI. The GUI's nice. It's cool, it's nifty. But if I have 100 computers in my virtual environment, and let's say the GUI takes 512 megabytes of RAM, do I really need to spend 5 gigabytes of RAM to run my virtual GUIs on machines that I'm not connecting to most of the time anyways? So Server Core allows us to get rid of the GUI. But Server Core means command line. And how many of you love the command line? Yeah, you're lying. I mean, I know that there were 3 or 4 of you who raised your hand. There are great uses for the command line, and I do enjoy using the command line when I have to. It gives you much more granular control. But let's face it, the GUI is easier. So in Server 2012, we've introduced this new feature called MinShell. MinShell is this hybrid between full GUI environment and Server Core. When you boot up, you get, when you log in, you get your command prompt window. And then it says loading Server Manager. So you don't have Internet Explorer, you don't have Windows Explorer, you don't have any of the graphical tools, but you have the Server GUI Manager. So it's kind of a hybrid between two. What's that? It's called MinShell. I'm going to be honest, it's not a product, and that MinShell is just a term that we use for it. But if you go into add and remove roles and features, when you've installed your server, there's under features, server or graphical shell and graphical management tools. And if you take off the graphical shell, but leave the graphical management tools there, it's there. You have this minimum environment. And you can, by the way, read about that on my blog that I posted this week, or that I'm not sure if it's publishing next week. So now we can manage all of our servers using Server Manager from the one location. Oh, I guess I should have advanced the slide to talk about Server Core and MinShell. There we go. See, I thought I was talking about it when you're asking what it's called, and it's on the slide behind. Oh, wait, no, it's not. So MinShell gives you the minimal user experience option. At the same time, you can still administer your servers locally from a with a mouse instead of the keyboard. And we can remember that 9 5s versus 5 9s. Hardware is the stumbling block sometimes. We have to be able to migrate our virtual machines. And if we have, now, how many of you use Hyper-V today? Okay, put your hands down for a second. Just for the fun of it, how many of you use a different virtualization technology? Out! No. That's okay. With Hyper-V, we have live migration for free, and we have the ability to build these multiple hosts. But what good is the multiple hosts if you have to shut the virtual machine down on host 1 to bring it up on host 2? Because you do have to patch your hosts as well. Or you may just want to rebalance your infrastructure. So we have the ability to live migrate without downtime. The live migration means, okay, host 1 is busy. We're going to move your virtual machine over to host 2. Your user who's connected to it doesn't know the difference. Your user who's connected to it just went right through. He was using his application. He was connecting to his website. I do a demonstration where he could have been watching a video on the virtual machine, and it doesn't matter where the virtual machine is. It just moves from one to the other without any downtime. And the way that works, it's got a heartbeat. It's on. You see, we're connected to on host 1, and we just start the migration. The disk contents are moved over, and the virtual machine files are moved over, and the memory state is moved over, and then it's just on node 2. Now here's the problem. How many of you love the term failover cluster? That's the first question Ollie. That's the first question I've asked that I got only one response. I grew up in Server 2000 and hated the term Microsoft Cluster Services. Oh my God, there was no 3 words in the English language that put more fear into my heart and made me want to drink more than Microsoft Cluster Services. So when Server 2008 came out, and somebody said, hey, Mitch, have you seen the clustering? And I said, no. He said, no, let me show you. And we sat down, and he installed the failover cluster service. It's a feature. And he built a cluster in about 3 minutes. What? It used to take 76 screens and a bottle of scotch, because you'd never get it right the first time, to build your failover cluster. Now, all of a sudden, I can build a failover cluster. I do a presentation for partners up in Canada called a Virtual Partner Technology Tour, and I'll go in with 2 laptops. I'll install Hyper-V server on both of them. I'll build the failover cluster between them. I'll create highly available virtual machines, and I'll start migrating one to the other. And then we have lunch. I mean, I've built an entire data center on laptops with full failover migration before lunch. It's gotten a lot easier. So if you haven't looked at it, it's time to look at it. And yes, I have some articles on either my blog or the Canadian IT Pro Connection that shows you how to do this. Now, disaster recovery. Oh, God. The first time I met Jeff Middleton, is Jeff in the room? No. I saw Jeff outside earlier. The first time I met Jeff Middleton, he came to Montreal to talk about, and I'm sure some of you saw this tour, he came to talk about how he handled disaster recovery for his clients leading up to Hurricane Katrina. How many of you saw him do that presentation? It was amazing, wasn't it? That the day before the flood was coming, I mean, everybody knew the flood was coming. Everybody was heading out of town. And Jeff was going from client to client, saying, okay, take this server and go. Take this server and go. And I'm thinking to myself, I used to be a combat infantryman in the special forces. My job was to run into people shooting at me. But if I hear the floods are coming, I'm taking my family and I'm going. With all due respect to my clients, I'm automating this process. So I call Jeff a hero, and I've had this great respect for him. But we start talking about disaster recovery. Server 2012 introduced a new feature called Hyper-V Replica. And Hyper-V Replica literally says, okay, your SBS, your server essentials, whatever servers you have on premise are going to be replicated off premise as well. Now, I see this as a great business opportunity for some of you to create recurring revenues and say, okay, you've got 1 server, 2 server, 3 server, 4. They're running on premise, but I'm going to host them, the replicas for you in my office, in my data center for a monthly charge. And when your building catches fire, or when the floods come, or when whatever disaster happens that your servers are down, it could be as simple as a power failure, or somebody walked in and stole your servers, doesn't matter. There's a replica offsite. It's not a 2-day-old replica. It is no more than a 5-minute-old replica, because once the initial copy is done, it just sends the deltas every 5 minutes over a regular internet connection. And by the way, first of all, this is not an add-on. This is free part of the product. And this is a great way for you guys to start creating recurring revenue in the post-SBS era. Hey, you've got your file server. You didn't want to go into the cloud, but let me give you a disaster recovery site. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You don't have to tell your clients that it's not costing you a dime, because there's no software, there's no licensing. It's just there. As soon as, and the way it works is you've got your primary site and you've got your primary site and your destination site, and here you've got the critical servers, and on the other side, in your destination, your replica site, it just keeps receiving and applies the changes to the replica virtual machine. So imagine you have a web server that you're hosting in your offices, or your clients are hosting in their offices, and their power goes down, and the secondary DNS record for www.yourclient.com goes to your DR site. And it costs you nothing to set up, and you're a hero because their website isn't down. If you were a real hero, you would have gotten them an Office 365 and their website would, anyway, but just showing you different options. So this slide should have been hidden. Now we get to the to the scariest slide in the deck. How many of you use System Center 2012 today? 2. 3, okay. I'm impressed. The reason I say that is because I expected nobody's hands to go up. I thought Ollie's would have. I'm disappointed in you. System Center gives us the ability to manage our entire environment beyond the wizards. This is this panacea that is really, we used to say it's not meant for smaller businesses. We used to have a product called System Center Essentials that was really designed for small businesses. And for those of you who ran Essential Business Server, you'll be familiar with it. And EBS was essentially bits of this and bits of that put into one package, while System Center Ops Manager was one full product, and System Center Configuration Manager was a second full product, and Virtual Machine Manager was a third, and Data Protection Manager was a fourth. Now we've made this into one product. Don't get me wrong, it's not smaller than it used to be. You do need 7 servers to run this. They can be virtual machines running on one host. And we have the ability to manage a larger small business. We talk about SMB. How many of you manage computer environments of 10 servers or 10 machines or less? Put your hands down. How many of you manage environments of 50 clients or less? How many of you do 50 to 100 clients? Up to 200 clients? Okay. So if you're going above 50, 75 clients in an organization, and you are starting to have the conversation about the private cloud, and maybe a hybrid cloud, on-prem, off-premise cloud, then we have options. We can manage everything from different interfaces. We can have one console to manage the on-premise servers and one console to manage the off-premise servers. And we can have one console to manage our clients and patch management for the clients, and another one to manage patches for our servers, and another to manage our virtualization environment. Or we can use System Center 2012, which is going to manage everything in an integrated environment, which is going to say, okay, you've bought one product, and it's going to do, let's start from the top. Let's start from the bottom. Configuration Manager is going to do life cycle management of your Windows PCs. Whether they're VDI or physical, it is going to provision them, install them, it is going to patch them, it is going to manage them, it is going to deploy applications, and this is your one-stop shop to manage your client PCs. Data Protection Manager, backup. Now, I know that there's some backup vendors in the building, and if you go into the exhibit hall, there are some backup vendors that do a really good job in there, and I don't have a bad thing to say against them, but I don't have a bad thing to say about Data Protection Manager either. It does a great job of backing up your virtual and your physical. And it has this really cool functionality that if you want to back up locally or if you want to back up off-site, if you want to back up live to hard disk and then archive it to tape, it'll do all of that for you. Everything I've been saying for years, every backup solution is more or less the same. You've just got to pick the one that has all of the features that you want. Well, DPM has all of the features and it's included here. Virtual Machine Manager. Wow. If you have one or two servers, you don't need Virtual Machine Manager. But for those of you who are managing 200, 300, 400 clients, where you may have 10, 15, 20 virtual machines, 4, 5, 6 hosts, VMM is the management tool that's going to do it. By the way, show me your hands again, those of you who use that, that rival platform that rhymes with B-Scare. A lot fewer hands went up that time when I called it that, huh? VMM has this great ability to manage ESXi through vCenter Server. So if you have been paying Palo Alto for your licensing and realize, okay, with Server 2012, Microsoft has a better virtualization story than they do, but I can't just rip and replace my 5 ESXi hosts on my vCenter Server and reinstall everything on Hyper-V. That's going to create all this downtime and all this headache. Well, VMM is going to allow you to manage the vCenter, the VMware environment, and over whatever period of time you choose, 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long it's going to be, it will manage the heterogeneous hypervisor environment. So you'll have 5 ESXi hosts and 1 Hyper-V host. And after 3 months, you'll have 4 ESXi hosts and 2 Hyper-V hosts, and so on and so on and so forth. And rather than over the course of that migration period, having to manage and monitor 2 entirely separate environments, which is a lot of work, and how many of you look for more work? No. So it's going to make our lives easier. Orchestrator. Orchestrator is cool. Orchestrator used to be called Opalis and has the greatest acronym, which they tell us not to use, but System Center Orchestrator, which we call SCORCH. And we're not supposed to do that, so. By the way, you running the camera, you'll edit that part out, right? So System Center Orchestrator is going to allow us to, you know, if I said script the tasks that you wanted to do, you'd say, big deal, I've got PowerShell. But if I said you could use a graphical environment that looks a little bit like Visio to take the building blocks of what you want to do and create this workflow, runbook automation to do everything that you want to do. And literally, you're building it like you'd build a Visio diagram. Step 1, provision virtual machine. Step 2, install operating system. Step 3, apply patches. Step 4, make virtual machine highly available. And you're just grabbing building blocks and goes to the one, and then when you run it, boop, boop, it's done. Makes our lives easier. Service Manager, I don't talk about Service Manager very often, but it's the ticketing system. You know, smaller organizations, how do people report errors to you or issues with their IT? In the smaller organizations, they pick up a phone and say, hey, Mitch, can you come over to my desk? And in mid-sized organizations, we start to have a ticketing system where they fill out a ticket. Usually they call their manager, and the manager fills out a ticket, and you get it on your desk. And most of you are paying for a third party. How many of you use a ticketing system like that of any sort? Yeah, and you're probably using either Chartec or Zenith or ConnectWise or someone else like that. Well, Service Manager does the same thing, and you don't have to keep paying recurring. Is there anyone from any of those 3 partners in the room? Okay. You don't have to keep paying recurring revenues to other, or recurring costs to other vendors. We love those vendors. In fact, I'm going to be at Chartec next month. But if you could charge recurring costs to your clients and not pay out recurring costs to a vendor, who's better off? You pay the one-time cost, but then all of the recurring revenues is money in your pocket. System Center Operations Manager, which on the other side, it used to be called MOM, which was a lot more appropriate because it looked over us and made sure we were happy and healthy all the time. When it was rebranded SCOM, System Center Operations Manager. This is going to create your reports. How many of you love writing reports? No? Okay. How many of you, I asked this question in Montreal yesterday. How do you know that all of the servers in your organization are healthy? Nobody's calling you. The answer I got in Montreal was, they function, they work. That's a good answer, right? Your systems are up because they work. Your phone's not ringing. Well, that's fine for a mom and pop shop. If you have a CXO looking over your shoulder and trying to justify the cost of an IT department or an IT service provider, then eventually it's working isn't going to be a good enough answer. We have to be able to justify ourselves and prove what we're doing. Hey, you know what? We're paying Mitch for nothing because the computers just work. Well, at the end of the month, I've issued a report that says 10 o'clock and all's well. October 30th and nothing went wrong with the computers. Well, that sounds good. The computers are up and running. And I charge $250 an hour, by the way, and my clients are very quickly going to say, well, if Mitch isn't doing anything because everything's just working, why don't I hire someone for $50 an hour and pocket the rest of the money? So what I do with Ops Manager, it monitors your systems, first of all, and by the way, if anything goes wrong, it sends you an email, or it sends you a message trap, or it sends you a text message, or it sends you a page, or it calls your cell phone, and it says, hey, something's wrong with server XYZ, and it tells you what's wrong. I was sitting at a baseball game with, is Stephen Banks in the room? Well, Stephen took me to a Mariners game a few years ago, and I had to go, I got a message from one of my clients' ops managers, and it said, there's a disastrous problem brewing, so I had to go up to the outside of the stands, and I pressed 15 buttons, and I resolved the issue. And Stephen didn't know what happened, and my client didn't know that it happened. But at the end of the month, Ops Manager let me generate this report that said, working, 8 o'clock p.m., Tuesday, December 12th. I guess they weren't playing baseball in December, Mariners, so they weren't even playing in September. Sometime in August, I like the Mariners, but this error happened. These steps had to be taken to resolve it. Was resolved with a 17-minute delay, which meant that if there was any downtime, and the SLA said that response had to be within an hour, it proved that I was within SLA. So I'm able to justify at the end of the month, or at any time, I can pull these reports that say, this is the state of your servers. And by the way, CXOs love reports. They love long-winded, they love bar charts and pie graphs. They love seeing green, and they love seeing numbers. If you need to justify new servers, it will show you growth month over month trends for the last year, 2 years, 3 years, or as long as your ops manager has been up. All of this is going to make your lives easier. Not if you're running 50 clients or less, by the way. Trust me. App controller. Remember we talked about Windows Azure? Remember we talked about Office 365? Imagine being able to have this hybrid on-prem, off-prem, private cloud, public cloud environment that is all managed from one place. So I can use App Controller to literally, I have a orchestrator workbook that App Controller runs to provision a new Hyper-V machine in Windows Azure. And it takes me about 4 seconds of work, and it takes about 5 minutes to get the server up and running, but it's all done, and it's all from one console. So System Center is another alternative for you if you're managing the higher-end SMB clients. And I'm not talking quality, I'm talking strictly based on numbers. System Center 2012 is the end-to-end solution for managing that. Right now, you're using product 1 to monitor your computers, and product 2 to pull the reports, and product 3 for your backup, and product 4 for virtual machine management. And forget about run books and all of that. You're just not able to do that. System Center lets you do all of that together, integrated. How am I doing on time? I got about 3 minutes left? Okay. So the shift is to cloud computing. We're going from physical to virtual to the private cloud to the public cloud. Wow. That's where we're heading. And by the way, this private cloud, public cloud is going to be a partnership. I talk about beyond virtualization. Now, I'm a virtualization guy, and the concept of going beyond virtualization kind of scares me because I'm going to be out of a job at a certain point. But if we go beyond the virtualization to the hybrid private-public cloud, where we can have the on-prem and off-prem servers, that virtualization is no longer a scary concept. It's something that we just do automatically. Even if we're installing a Windows Server Essentials, we're installing it on a Hyper-V machine. Why? First of all, Hyper-V server costs nothing. B, if Hyper-V server, or if the hardware that Hyper-V servers goes down, I've actually gone into a customer. We all have this guy that we support because he's a friend of ours. Lawrence Young is my son's godson. He runs a consulting firm. He has 5 customers, and he has this small SBS box. And when he said, how should he install it? I said, install it on Hyper-V. He said, why would I possibly install it on Hyper-V? I've got one server that's supporting 5 people. I said, you're going to do it anyways. I'll do it for you. Okay, let's fast forward 6 months. Did I mention he bought this really cheap white box server? Calls me in a bit of a panic. It was the beginning of Victoria Day weekend in Canada. Now, Victoria Day weekend is one of these 4-day weekends that nobody works, but in the US and around the globe, nobody else recognizes Victoria Day weekend. Well, the Brits might. Calls me Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and says, Mitch, my server exploded. I said, okay, what's wrong? No, it actually caught fire. There was smoke coming out of my server. I'm on my way. And I went over. Now, I'm not a hardware guy. I could replace a power supply if it's a question of replacing screws, but I'm not a hardware guy. And he said, what do? I can't be down for the weekend. First of all, I have to be able to work. And second of all, my clients need to be able to see my website. They have to be able to log onto my portal. They need to be able to connect to me to pay me money or to sign new contracts. So I had this HP EliteBook 8540 at the time, I believe it was, that I'd brought with me. And I installed Hyper-V server on it. And by the way, it's Windows. So it's got the Windows kernel, it's got the Windows drivers. So I installed don't use your laptops as a server for long term, by the way. But for short term, until it was going to be 4 days till he got a new power supply, I installed Hyper-V on it. I took his hard drive out. I connected his SATA hard drive using one of those external USB connectors, and his SBS box, which he installed in Hyper-V. Mitch, you're crazy. Why do I need to install in Hyper-V? Was up in 7 minutes from the time I walked through his door. So whether you're these tiny little environments using just the virtualization, or if you've got the larger SMB clients that need the private cloud, or even, oh my God, even better still, the private and public cloud, you should be looking at all of these solutions. Now that SBS is forcing you out of the shallow end anyways, it's time to do it. You need to do this. You need to learn the skills, but don't worry, because I have faith in you. I know how smart you guys are. You can do this. Despite what one of you in the back may think, I'm not smarter than any of you. I just got a jump start on this. If I can do it, you guys can really do it. So I'm encouraging you to look beyond SBS and say, okay, what solutions does Microsoft have for me that I can provide to my clients that can allow me to do less work and earn more money with getting out of my comfort zone? You know, I say to the people, to people all the time, enterprise IT skills scale down really well. Small business IT skills don't scale up very well. So you are going to have to do a little bit of work, but don't worry. I have faith in you. I trust that you can do it. And the only reason I know that is because I think you're all smarter than I am, and you all have the drive to do it. The only thing that I have that you don't is a logo. So go out and get a logo and you'll be fine. No. So with that being said, let me point you to some very important resources. First of all, follow me on Twitter at mgarvis. My blog, I blog in two places. I got to change this slide. Garvis.ca, and if you type in Canadian IT Pro Connections, it'll take you to the evangelism site for Microsoft Canada, and I blog there too. But I'm glad to answer your questions. That's what I do for a living. I want to help you with this transition through the post-SBS era, which, you know what, how many of you said, oh my God, SBS is going away, what am I going to do? Here's what you're going to do. I've given you 4 or 5 or 6 really viable options, and I'd love to help you through all of them. Any questions?
I've got a bunch of clients that are on premium with SQL. So I go back to my client and say, I can do your email to exchange. What I do with the SQL box, or you pay $9,000 to $10,000 for SQL.
Yeah, there's one thing that I didn't discuss today. The question was, I'm going to shorten it really. What do I do about my SQL box that may theoretically cost me thousands and thousands of dollars to build out of the SBS environment? The answer is, I don't know. I don't do licensing. I don't do costs. I don't do sales. Evangelism rocks. I don't know any of the costs. I do expect that there will be transition plans and transition licensing packs, but you're going to have to speak to your PAM or your DISTI and get more information about that. Microsoft isn't in the business of, I can't say that anymore, well, Microsoft wants to help you. They don't want to hurt you. So speak to your PAM and you'll get the answers. There was a question in the back, then you. So the question is, if I'm building my Active Directory in Azure, how am I connecting to it, authenticating to it, if I'm not using direct access? You got me on that one. That's something that I would always have on-prem and off-prem. And if you have IPv6, how many of you love IPv6? Well, okay. With IPv6, it will be easier, but you're still a few years away from that. So I would have that as a mixed mode, on-prem, off-prem.
I used to use SMS 2.0 before it was System Center.
Yep.
And with the new System Center 2012 package, would it technically replace a whole RMM solution? Could that become an RMM solution? Or do the machines still have to be on the same subnet in order for you to manage them?
The answer is no, they don't have to be on the same subnet. Okay. I have clients that have System Center. By the way, the question was, can System Center Configuration Manager in System Center 2012 manage across subnets? I have clients that I consult with that use one System Center console to manage entire continents and very often intercontinentally. Okay. So absolutely, it rocks.
They don't have to be on the same domain.
Same company, yes. There was talk a few years ago of having System Center Essentials in 4 different environments and then having a mom server at the top managing all of them. But for one company, absolutely. Mark.
Expanding on what you're talking about with System Center Essentials, are you licensing it to yourself to be able to manage to your customers, licensing it to your customers and letting them cover that cost? How are you interfacing? Who owns that? RMMs today, in most cases, in an MSP model, we own that license and we're reselling it. So I'm curious how you're working that.
Okay, first of all, one of the advantages of working with evangelism is I don't do a whole lot of client sales anymore. The way I would do it, most of my clients are a lot larger, and they do purchase their own System Center licenses for each one, and I can just monitor them remotely. However, I could put you in touch with a licensing specialist who could better answer that question. The answer is I don't know for smaller organizations, but somebody has an answer. Look, System Center Essentials is one of those chasms that nobody's entirely sure what's happening. There isn't a V-Next announced. My hope, my belief, my expectation is that at some point, by the way, I didn't talk about costs for System Center 2012 for a reason. I'm hoping that at some point, SMB licensing models for the full System Center stack are announced. There isn't going to be, to my prediction, another ski, but there will be, I hope, smaller business licensing models that will address those issues.
For those who want to make that jump, one of the best ways to do it, the most effective that we have, has been open value subscription.
Well, open value subscription, absolutely.
Yeah, the entry points are much more powerful.
Yeah. There was another question out here? No? Okay. Does anybody else have any more questions? So I want to thank you very much for spending the hour with me. And we're in Vegas, right? Thank you very much. And remember to fill out your evals favorably, and I read them religiously, so if you do have any comments, notice I left the hat at home this time. When I was at MVP Nation in March, somebody commented on my morning